Blakeney Chapel. Blakeney Chapel is a ruined building on the coast of North Norfolk, England. Despite its name, it was probably not a chapel, nor is it in the adjoining village of Blakeney, but rather in the parish of Cley next the sea. The building stood on a raised mound or eye on the seaward end of the coastal marshes, less than 200 meters, 220 yards, from the sea and just to the north of the current channel of the River Glaven, where it turns to run parallel to the shoreline. It consisted of two rectangular rooms of unequal size, and appears to be intact in a 1586 map, but is shown as ruins in later charts. Only the foundations and part of a wall still remain. 3 archaeological investigations between 1998 and 2005 provided more detail of the construction, and showed 2 distinct periods of active use. Although it is described as a chapel on several maps, there is no documentary or archaeological evidence to suggest that it had any religious function. A small hearth, probably used for smelting iron, is the only evidence of a specific activity on the site. Much of the structural material was long ago carried off for reuse in buildings in Cley and Blakeney. The surviving ruins are protected as a scheduled monument and Grade 2 listed building because of their historical importance, but there is no active management. The ever-present threat from the encroaching sea is likely to increase following a realignment of the Glaven's course through the marshes, and lead to the loss of the ruins. Description: the Blakeney Chapel ruins consist of an east-west rectangular structure, S1 18 meters x 7 meters, 59 feet x 23 feet, in size, with a smaller rectangular building, S2, 13 meters x 5 meters, 43 feet x 16 feet, built onto the southern side of the main room. Most of the structure is buried, only a 6 meters, 20 feet, length of a flint and mortar wall was exposed to a height of 0.3 meters, 1 foot, prior to the excavation of 2004-05. The ruins stand on the highest point of Blakeney Eye at about 2 meters, 7 feet, above sea level. The eye is a sandy mound in the marshes that is located inside the sea wall at the point where the River Glaven turns westward towards the sheltered inlet of Blakeney Haven. Cley Eye is a similar raised area on the east bank of the river. Despite the name, Blakeney Eye, like most of the northern part of the marshes in this area, is actually part of the parish of Cley next the sea. The land on which the building stands was owned by the Calthorpe family until its purchase by banker Charles Rothschild in 1912. Rothschild gave the property to the National Trust, which has managed it since. There is no public access to the site. The ruins are protected as a scheduled monument and Grade 2 listed building because of their historical importance. These listings do not cover the land around them, but the whole of the marsh forms part of the 7,700 hectare, 19,000 acre, North Norfolk coast site of Special Scientific Interest, SSSI, because of its internationally important wildlife value. The SSSI is now additionally protected through Natura 2000, Special Protection Area, SPA, and Ramsar listings, and is part of the Norfolk Coast Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, AONB. Documented history. The building was first shown on a 1586 map of the Blakeney and Cley area, apparently drawn to be used in evidence in a legal case regarding the rights to wreck and salvage, the outcome of which is unknown. The original map disappeared in the 19th century, but a number of copies still exist. In this map, the building on the eye is shown as intact and roofed, but it has no name. A map by the Cranefields from 1769 has the building as Eye House, but by 1797 cartographer William Fodden's map of Norfolk shows the chapel ruins, a description that was then consistently used from the 19th century onwards. Some maps, including Fodden's, show a second ruined chapel across the Glaven on Cley Eye, but no other documentation exists for that building. The medieval churches of St. Nicholas, Blakeney and St. Margaret's, Cley, and the now ruined Blakeney Friary, were not the first religious buildings in the area. An early church was recorded in the 1086 Domesday Book at Snitterley. Snitterley was a former name for Blakeney, the current name first appearing in 1340, but the 11th century church's location is unknown, and there is no reason to think that it is on the site of the chapel. An anonymous booklet on Blakeney published in 1929 states that there was a chapel of ease on the marshes, served by a friar from the convent, but the document on which this seems to be based, a calendar of patent rolls dated April 20, 1343, simply notes that a local hermit was given permission to seek alms in divers parts of the realms. There is no evidence of a dedication of any religious building on the marshes, and no mention of a chapel in any surviving medieval documents. Investigations. The first investigation of the chapel ruins, supported by the National Trust, was conducted by the local history group in the winter of 1998-99. This survey was conducted under a license from English Heritage that allowed access but did not permit excavation, so it relied on height measurements, geophysics, resistivity, and magnetometry, and molehill sampling. The area surveyed was 100 meters long and 40 meters wide, 109 yards by 44 yards. The magnetometry failed to detect the subterranean features of the chapel, but did show an unexpected linear anomaly, related to buried ironwork from wartime defenses. The resistivity survey clearly showed the larger room, but barely detected the smaller, suggesting that it had less substantial foundations, was probably less well constructed, and possibly later in date. Plans for a realignment of the Glaven Channel meant that the eye would be left unprotected to the north of the river, and would eventually be destroyed by coastal change. It was decided that the only practical course of action was to investigate the site while it still existed, and a preliminary evaluation was carried out in 2003 in preparation for a full survey in 2004-05. The surveyed area covered 10 hectares, 25 acres, significantly more than the 0.4 hectares, 1 acre, of the 1998 investigations. 50 trenches were excavated in a herringbone pattern outside the buildings, each 50 meters long and 1.8 meters wide, 164 feet by 6 feet, and 6 trenches of varying dimensions were created inside the chapel. These equated in total area to 2 of the standard trenches. The geology was investigated with 8 boreholes, and geophysics, magnetometry and metal detection were used to locate subsurface anomalies. The major excavation of the site in the winter of 2004-05 concentrated on the building and a 10 meters, 33 feet, zone surrounding it. The results indicated that there were a number of phases of occupation. The remains of the building were reburied after excavation, so nothing is now visible at the surface. Archaeology. Early occupation. The earliest evidence of permanent occupation is a series of ditches of 11th or 12th century date which are believed to have formed an enclosure, the southeast corner of which lies below the chapel. Evidence for any buildings within the enclosure has either been lost to the Glaven or is buried outside the survey area. Few finds were associated with the ditches, although some fragments of Roman or earlier pottery and 3 Henry III pennies were found nearby. As elsewhere on the site, there is little evidence to link the old pottery to its location when found. By the time of the construction of the main building, sometime in the 14th century, the ditches had filled with sand. A small hearth was built at ground level, shortly before or during the erection of S1. It appears to have had fairly light use, but the presence of slag suggests that it was intended for smelting iron, perhaps by a smith. There was evidence for a number of small fires elsewhere in S1 at a similar date to the hearth, but whether they were related to the smelting is unknown. At this time, hearths could not melt metallic iron, but produced a bloom, a mixture of iron and slag, which could be converted to wrought iron by repeated heating and hammering. Another, even earlier, smelting hearth is known from West Runton, 17 kilometers, 10 miles, further east on the Norfolk coast. The main ore in this area is the iron-rich local carstone. Medieval. The larger north building was built without deep foundation trenches, but was nevertheless a solid, well-built flint and mortar construction. The building had substantial time and money spent on it in the opinion of the principal archaeologist. The flints were selected to decrease in size as the walls rose, and the internal corners were decorated with limestone blocks set as coins. Seashells were recovered, with the distribution suggesting that they were once part of the fabric of the building as galleting, strengthening for the mortar. There were entrances in the west and northeast walls, and some evidence that there were once windows in the northwest and south walls. The floor was compacted soil, and the original